Well, Brittney Griner's released. That's the whole video. I am being told that that is not the end of the video because, as with pretty much everything that happens today in sports or in culture, there are multiple sides going at it already over the great news that she's been released. So CBS broke the story that Brittney Griner is being released from Russia in a prisoner exchange for Viktor Bout, who is an international arms dealer. And so I haven't read any comments or commentary or opinions yet about what has been going on, but basically it is a one-for-one swap. Brittney Griner is being released from Russian custody in return for the U.S. releasing Bout. I want to be able to engage with some of the narratives and some of the takes that are going to be flying around over the next couple of days based on this story. First off, it's just wild to me that Russia can imprison innocent Americans and then we end up trading terrorists for the release of these innocent people. And I think that's the really sticky point here, is that we're releasing a convicted arms dealer and international terrorist for a basketball player. And so one of the things that I'm anticipating I'm going to hear a lot in the next couple of days is that this prisoner swap was not worth it. And right off the bat, I have a lot of difficulty with that kind of language, because if we're talking about assigning relative value to somebody's life, whether it is worth having Brittney Griner back in the States versus releasing this arms dealer back to Russian custody, I would just be careful about the assumptions that we're making about the value of a human life. And if people are feeling like the US is losing out on this deal, or that it is making the world a less safe place because we're releasing a terrorist, I will say first off that I'm pretty sure Brittney Griner didn't ask for this. I'm pretty sure she was not asking to be arrested and to be the center of this polarizing debate, whether the US should be intervening on her behalf or trying to swap prisoners for her release. Second piece that I think gets overlooked is that because due process, at least the idea of due process, exists in America, in theory, we shouldn't have any political prisoners that are imprisoned solely for political purposes here. So that all of the prisoners that we would swap, in theory, should be criminals. Whereas Russia doesn't have that kind of system, where they apparently are imprisoning not only their own citizens, but other countries' citizens just for political expediency. And so you have these swaps where we are releasing criminals back to Russia in exchange for our own citizens back. And that situation is forced upon us because we hold to these ideals. We hold to the rule of law. I would hesitate for us to compromise that, because that is such a pillar of how our society and our government works. And the other piece to this is that Brittney Griner was not the only high-profile American citizen who is being detained in Russia. Retired U.S. Marine Paul Whelan is still imprisoned there, and the CBS article was very clear to say that this was his 4th anniversary, they called it. I don't know if he would really want to call it an anniversary, but 4 years since he's been detained in Russia. He has not yet been released, or at least his release has not been negotiated yet. And his brother, David, did put out a statement saying he wholeheartedly celebrated Brittney Griner's release. He knows what it means to Griner's family and friends that she was released. So he did say, this is again the brother of Paul Whelan, the one who is imprisoned in Russia, that the Biden administration made the right decision and he does not begrudge Miss Griner her freedom. I think that's important to remember as everyone spins their takes and kind of political arguments over the next couple of days. And this is from someone who desperately wants his brother to be home, whose brother has been imprisoned in Russia for the past 4 years. So a couple of takeaways from the way this story is developing. First, I hope that everyone who was active in working and getting the word out to try to get Brittney Griner released will be just as active when it comes to another American citizen, Paul Whelan, getting released and having that be negotiated. That's first and foremost. And second, I am anticipating that this is going to become a political football, that people will say like, oh, why did the Biden administration value having Brittney Griner released over a retired Marine. This debate has a lot of opportunity to cause a lot of division among people. I can see the lines easily being drawn between race and retired soldier or activist athlete, straight versus LGBT. And so what I would encourage us is to take a second and take stock of the whole context of the situation before we start dividing ourselves up into different camps about who's right and who's wrong. I think we have to consider that the Russian government knows very clearly what the types of divisions and dividing lines are within the United States, politically and culturally. And it's very possible that Russia was willing to do this deal only in a one-for-one swap because they knew that releasing one without the other would easily cause the kind of divisions and arguments that we might see in the coming days. Another factor to consider is that Brittney Griner's original arrest may have been politically motivated. For some people, it's not even a question. But to get to this point now, you also imagine, out of all of the athletes who go to Russia to play professionally, first off, I find it hard to believe that Brittney Griner was the only one who may have brought any kind of illicit substance in or out of Russia. And then out of all of those athletes, they just happen to arrest and choose to throw the book at the most polarizing one. All of it sounds very convenient. As we consider this situation over the next couple of days, I think we need to consider that not everything is as we take it on face value. At least my impression when I first thought about the prisoner swap was almost like two teams in the NBA trading players, right? And it just feels like the U.S. was a team that got fleeced by Russia, that, you know, we gave up so much in a terrorist and an international arms dealer, and we just got back a basketball player that half the country doesn't even like or care for. Or I would really caution us to think carefully about how we're talking about that, because within a league, within any sports league, there are rules that help determine what is fair and what is not. The teams are, for the most part, negotiating on even ground. And what we talked about earlier with due process being a factor in the United States and us not keeping political prisoners just for the sake of negotiating or gaining an advantage over another country because we value the rule of law, those are constraints that the Russian government may not have to consider. I think we need to think about that some of these circumstances were contrived and forced and brought to this point. The US government is doing what they can within the limits and the boundaries of what options are available. And so this wasn't just one team, if you want to call it that, entering and signing off on a deal that's not good for them, that puts them at a disadvantage just because they're not smart or not thinking ahead. This is because there are two teams working on different playing grounds with different rules and different ways of conducting themselves. And if we start talking about political expediency and just doing things that make us come out on top, then we start to bend and compromise some of those rules that make our society and our culture what it is. So finally, I'm glad that Brittney Griner is released. I'm glad that she's free and able to return back to her life with her family and her friends. I do hope that we can continue to put forth effort for the release of Paul Whelan. He deserves just as much support from the US, from the government, as Brittney Griner did. As we think through and talk about this situation over the next couple of days, next couple of weeks, let's keep David Whelan's words in mind. We don't need to begrudge anyone their freedom, regardless of what their political stance is. Guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you want to hear more about the situation that led up to the release of Brittney Griner, go ahead and check out this video where we have a philosophy professor and a military serviceman talk about their different takes on athlete protest and what that means for patriotism. Be sure to subscribe. That helps our channel to grow and to continue producing great content.